Okay, let's dive into a fascinating strategic dilemma where saving the world comes with an absolutely massive price tag. We're going to break down a business case where the stakes aren't just market share or profit, but global survival itself.
It's a classic paradox, right? You'd think better tech makes for easier choices, but we're exploring a case where a breakthrough predictive model didn't solve the problem at all. In fact, it created a much more complex one, a high-stakes choice between being fiscally responsible and facing total catastrophe. So let's talk about the Pan-Pacific Defense Corps, or the PPDC. They were created for one reason and one reason only, to fight giant monsters called kaiju, using these massive, pilot-driven robots called Jaegers. For years, their biggest problem was just reacting in time. But then, technology basically gave them a crystal ball.
And here's the crucial point. They can now see an attack coming sometimes days ahead of time. But, and this is a big but, the system isn't perfect. It cries wolf. And that uncertainty creates this impossible economic and ethical question for the people in charge.
To really get the weight of this decision, you have to look at the numbers. And believe me, the numbers here are just astronomical. This isn't just expensive. We're talking about a scale of spending that redefines what a government program can even cost.
So let's start with the sticker price. Each Jaeger, each one, is a $50 billion investment. That's billion with a B. Not for the whole fleet, for a single unit. It's the largest single defense expenditure in human history.
And it doesn't stop there. Just to keep a Jaeger on standby, paying for pilots, technicians, energy, maintenance, that costs $4.5 billion a year. That's the price you pay even if it never, ever leaves the bay. Now here's the number that keeps the accountants up at night. The cost of being wrong. Every single time that predictive model sends them on a wild goose chase, it costs $250 million. That's a phantom threat that drains very real resources.
And this chart just brilliantly illustrates the tension they're under. A false alarm is $250 million. An actual fight, you're looking at over $5 billion in deployment and repairs. But letting a kaiju get through, that's a $50 billion catastrophe. And that's not even counting the unthinkable human cost. So every prediction forces this gamble between these three outcomes.
So how did the PPDC even try to solve this? Well, they realized this wasn't just a tactical choice anymore. It was a strategic one. So they broke it down into 4 competing business philosophies, and each one has some really profound implications.
Okay, the first approach is the most straightforward one, the state-controlled mandate. You can think of this as the ultimate public service model. Jaegers are like a global fire department. When the alarm rings, you go, period. Money is a distant secondary concern to saving lives.
Now, the strength of this is its simplicity and its moral clarity. It aligns perfectly with the PPDC's whole mission, and that builds a ton of public confidence. The weakness, though, is, well, it's a huge one. It's completely unsustainable financially. If you deploy for every single potential threat, real or not, you risk bankrupting the entire program.
The second option says, hey, let's bring business to the table. In this public-private model, corporations that have massive economic skin in the game, we're talking insurance companies, shipping giants, they help pay the bills. And, crucially, they get a seat at the decision-making table. On the plus side, this approach creates a way more sustainable funding model, and it brings in some much-needed business efficiency. But the downside is a really big one. You're putting corporate interests right in the middle of life-or-death decisions, and that raises all kinds of complicated questions about governance and creates some serious moral hazards.
All right, get ready for option 3, because this is where things get cold. This model removes human emotion from the equation entirely. The Actuarial Defense Initiative basically turns the deployment decision into a hard mathematical formula. It's based on a region's total economic value, which actually includes a calculated value for human life. From a purely fiscal point of view, this model is the strongest. It is ruthlessly efficient, and it gets rid of any political interference. But the weakness is that it is morally and politically catastrophic. The moment you explicitly put a dollar value on human life, the system, while logical on a spreadsheet, would cause a total collapse of public trust. And the final option? It basically dissolves the central command structure. Under the sovereign discretion model, the PPDC provides the technology and the intelligence, but each individual nation gets to decide for itself when to deploy a Jaeger to protect its own coast, and it has to pay its own way.
The key advantage here is sovereignty. It respects that nations want autonomy, and it cuts down on a lot of global bureaucracy.
The glaring weakness, though, is that it absolutely guarantees global defense inequality. You'd create a world of haves and have-nots, where your survival literally depends on your country's GDP. That completely undermines the whole idea of collective security.
So, with those 4 very distinct philosophies laid out, let's synthesize all this information. Let's put them side by side and see the core trade-offs at a glance.
This table really just puts it all into perspective. It forces us to ask, who makes the call? How do you even measure success in each of these models? And what's the one thing that's most likely to make the whole system fall apart? You can see how we go from purely saving lives to maximizing ROI. Each path presents a fundamentally different vision of what the Jaeger program is even for. Ultimately, this whole business case boils down to one central, incredibly uncomfortable question, and there's no easy answer here. It forces a choice between deeply held values, where every single option comes with a staggering cost, a cost measured either in dollars or in lives. What's the right price for survival?